So, episode 2. Now, before I review episode 2, I just want to give a bit of detail about what we can, in theory, expect. Though I think what we've seen already shows we're not going to expect it at all. Now, I've got The Return of the King. So, within this, it has the appendices, which is what Amazon has got the rights for. Appendix B, The Tale of Years. Very, very brief mentions of things that went on in the First Age. Then we've got the Second Age, and it gives a very, very brief kind of introduction to it. And then it gives the timeline. So it says, Year 1, Foundation of the Grey Havens and of Lindon. Now, this would suggest that, based on what we've seen, Lindon's been around. Indeed, the Grey Havens have been around for quite a while. So we're fairly well into, would be the suggestion of the Second Age. We then have the Edain reach Numenor in year 32. Year 40, many dwarves leave their old cities in Ered Luin and go to Moria and swell its numbers. So the fact that we have no dwarves present in the kind of the immediate interactions with Lindon, which is where the Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains, are, that suggests that we're again a fair bit along. Indeed, the dating of the dwarves' situation could well be put based on Prince Durin. I've not done the research to check to see where that would date it, if that is what's going on. But we then have, as you can see here, there's the list here, and then there, and ending here. And so we go with Eregion founded 750, the year 750. Eregion's founded 150 years after the first ships of the Númenóreans appear off the coast. Now, to be clear, the whole situation, in reference to what I said yesterday about Valinor being open to anyone who wants to go, we need to remember that one of the things that we read in the Akallabeth, in the Silmarillion, is that you have boats travelling from Tol Eressë, which is the easternmost part of Valinor, the island just off Aman. You have boats sailing from there all the way to Numenor, because the elves want to have contact. Because remember, at the end of the War of the Wrath, a lot of the elves who were part of the War of the Wrath, they accepted the forgiveness that was offered by the Valar, and so they go back to Aman and live in the Undying Lands. But they still want to have contact with the friends that they had and their descendants, who they fought alongside in Beleriand. So there's lots of visits going there. So that's the first thing. But as a result of them coming with boats, obviously it then increases the desire for wanting to explore. And because there is a ban on Numenor and the Númenóreans from going to the Undying Lands, instead they turn eastwards and they look to the rest of Middle-earth. So 600 of the Second Age, the first ships of the Númenóreans appear off the coasts. This is before Eregion has been built. 150 years later, Eregion exists in the Rings of Power, and we do not have contact with Númenor. Because what we're going to find at the start of this third episode coming up next week is we're going to discover Númenor. And we're going to discover all sorts of ridiculous things about it, because I know the name of the Queen of Númenor. That in and of itself is a minor issue, but actually blooming major issue. But having a queen, not a massive deal. They did have queens. However, we'll come to that in a bit, maybe even in the next video. So, Eregion, founded by the Noldor. 1000. Year 1000 of the Second Age, Sauron is alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans, chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. He begins the building of Barad-dûr. Now, I've been informed from videos that I watch, I believe, that the kind of glowing sign, the glowing symbol that Galadriel was obsessed with was actually for Mordor. But if we're pre-Númenor appearing, Mordor hasn't been created, because Mordor is created in response to the Númenóreans. So, all sorts of issues there. 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron endeavours to seduce the Eldar. So, not tries to have a relationship or anything like that. He tries to entice them into being partners with him, so that he is able to try and con them, is his aim. And it says that Gil-galad refuses to treat with him. So he refuses to meet and chat with him. However, the Smiths of Eregion are won over, and this is what leads to the Ring of Power, the Rings of Power being made. And at this point, the Númenóreans have permanent havens in Middle-earth. So it's not just they're coming and they're visiting, but now they've actually got places where they will settle, and they will have constant trips toing and froing from Númenor to Middle-earth. 1500. The Elven Smiths, instructed by Sauron, reach the height of their skill and begin forging of the Rings of Power. So we're coming close to halfway through the Second Age at this point, because the Second Age goes all the way to 3441. So with all of this, we're seeing that there's a massive issue already with how things are being laid out. Now, on top of that, we have, let's see, in 3255 of the Second Age, and this is what I'll kind of leave as a hanger for the next episode, Ar-Pharazôn becomes king by seizing the scepter, and he seizes it from the character that we discover is currently the Queen of Númenor when we see Númenor for the first time in Rings of Power. Now, why is this important? Celebrimbor dies in the year 1697. That's long before the person who is queen comes to be queen. In fact, long before she's even born. Indeed, one of her predecessors, the King Tar-Minastir, he sends a great navy from Númenor to Lindon, and Sauron is defeated. So this is the first major issue of Sauron, that he tries to control the Rings of Power, discovers that the three rings that Celebrimbor has created exist, and so he kicks off, and interestingly, at the point at which the invasion happens, that is when Gil-galad sends Elrond to Eregion. Sauron's nowhere to be seen at the moment. We know he's there. Indeed, based on spoilers that are there, we know which character he is within the Rings of Power. But he is not there as Sauron. He has not tried to deceive anyone yet. He's not made the One Ring, which happens 95 years, roughly, before Elrond goes to Eregion. And that's all in their source material. I won't go on any further with that. That's just to make the point. This is their source material. They're the ones who've bought this particular source material, the appendices. It's all there in black and white, very, very clear. They have completely butchered the timeline of this. And I mean, we can sometimes talk about timelines being changed to make things flow better, but there's absolutely no need with this. There is absolutely no need. But one other thing I'll just quickly get from the timeline, because this is one other thing that's absolutely glaring. Into the Third Age. Now, first off, I've already had a go at the whole thing with the Harfoots, which are hobbits. It's very blatant within the material that they have. The year 1050 of the Third Age, the Periannath are first mentioned in records with the coming of the Harfoots to Eriador. So this is where they got the name Harfoots from. It's from the year 1050 of the Third Age in the appendices, okay? It's there. It says the Harfoots. The Harfoots are part of the Periannath, also known as hobbits. This whole rubbish that's been said by the makers of the Rings of Power, that Tolkien didn't say anything about Harfoots. It's just hobbits. No, the hobbits are the Harfoots, the Stores, and the Fallowhides. They are part of the Harfoots are part of the hobbits, the halflings. So we're seeing the first time they're mentioned in the writings as 1050 of the Third Age. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't exist. However, if you're going to use a group of people who are not going to be known throughout the entirety of the Third Age, so of the Second Age, they're not going to be known for the entirety of the Second Age by elves or humans, what on earth is the point of using them? All it is, oh look, it's the hobbits. We know them. We saw them in the Lord of the Rings. We saw them in the Hobbit. Yeah, this is all Tolkien. No, it's not. Hobbits didn't exist then. This is regardless of the fact that they've also completely messed around with the racial side of things. The closest you could get to anyone who is not kind of out and out blatantly white would be a description of swarthy within all this. Swarthy doesn't mean black skin. It doesn't mean someone like Lenny Henry. Swarthy means darker complexion, but not dark skinned. So kind of the equivalent of the back of my hand and the front of my hand. So I'm slightly more swarthy on the back of my hand than on the front, on the palm of my hand. So the whole thing with the hobbits, just a complete mess. So I'm going to talk now about the episode 2. First thing to point out, and I've already alluded to a fair bit with some of the stuff that I've spoken about, but the whole lapse of time. You've got messages coming out from Lindon, going out to the furthest outposts in Rhovanion. How quickly does the message travel? You've got to bear in mind that the gap, the distance between where they start at Lindon and Rhovanion, it's not just a length of walking through on a road or anything. There's lots of bits where there wouldn't be roads. There's also lots of bits which are not easy to pass through. For example, you've got the Misty Mountains. Depending on how far out you are in Rivanion, you also potentially have Greenwood the Great to pass through as well. So all these different things that you've got to pass through, and the message goes out, no more Sauron, you can come home, lads. It's ridiculous how quickly that's done. Same too with the boat trip. The journey to the Undying Lands, where Galadriel jumps off the boat. The time that elapses from when she sets off to getting there, given how wide the ocean is, and given that they're relying purely on wind power, on sails of the boat, it's not going to take the time that they're suggesting. It's going to take far, far longer. There's elements where you can understand certain ways in which the time is done. I think it's fair to say that Jackson didn't do too bad a job in Lord of the Rings. Certainly when it came to the start of the expedition, first the hobbits leaving the Shire to get to Rivendell, and then from Rivendell down to Mordor. That wasn't done too badly in relation to the books. However, we did have a massive time jump from when Bilbo leaves for Rivendell and when Frodo leaves. Because Frodo leaves from Bag End, but in the book, he leaves from Underhill. I think it was. I can't remember the name exactly offhand, but he leaves Bag End. He goes and buys another house with the idea being that he's going to be able to sneak out a lot easier. And that actually happens not while he's still 33, because the whole point with the celebration for Bilbo's 111th birthday is that it's also Frodo's 33rd birthday. So it's his coming of age as an adult, as a hobbit. But actually, he's about the same age as Bilbo was when he left for going out to the Lonely Mountain. He's in his, I think he might even be the same age. He's either 50 or 51, something like that. So the whole thing there, that's squished down. However, the time lapse doesn't actually matter for how the story is told, and what the content of that time lapse. It doesn't matter that much. I mean, there is a bit of silliness about how quickly Gandalf is able to go from being in the Shire to being down in Gondor, even though he's on horseback. But overall, that's an acceptable time-lapse squish. Not here, because this is clearly other things are going on, and they're pacing them at exactly the same rate. It makes no sense. Then we have the meteorite that strikes, that we discover is a man. A male character. Some people have been suggesting that it's the Rings of Power, trying to suggest it might be Gandalf. There's also some suggestion from the way the story tells that they're trying to make us think that it could be Sauron. But either way, this is supposed to be someone who is powerful, who has magical powers, like the Astari. But the Astari don't come in until the Third Age. We know that this character isn't Sauron because of who is Sauron. But this character who's fallen out of the sky is not Sauron. The whole thing about him being an Astari, it does not fit with everything that we know within the timeline. The timeline that is within the appendices, that we know when the Astari turn up. We know when Gandalf, when Saruman, when Radagast and the Blue Wizards all turn up. It's not in the Second Age. Then we have the rather ridiculous statement from Celebrimbor, where he says, "They say," and then started talking about the Silmarils. Celebrimbor was there. if I remember rightly, he was born in the Undying Lands. He knows about the Silmarils before they were stolen by Morgoth. So when he says "they say," who's they? He knows more about the Silmarils than almost anyone else. Probably, certainly anyone else who's alive now in Middle Earth. And yet he says "they say" when talking about them. It's ridiculous. It's trying to put a mysticism around them which doesn't need to be there. If you want to do anything, it should be a mysticism around Celebrimbor, because he's the one who was there. He is the son of Curufin. He is the grandson of Feanor. He is the greatest artisan in Middle-earth at that time. His skills are said to rival that of Feanor. And Feanor is deemed to be the greatest creator, the greatest crafter of the elves. So it's an utterly ridiculous statement to make. Something else that it's possible to pick up now that we've seen Galadriel with other people. Galadriel is supposed to be 6 foot at least. The whole description of elves is that the female elves are at least 6 foot tall, and male elves are at least 6'6". Of course, that does leave us with a bit of an issue for Legolas, but that the way they did it in Lord of the Rings, it fitted in fairly well. But Galadriel is not tall. She's nowhere near 6 foot. It breaks the immersion when you have someone who's not looking at all like the character they're supposed to be. She's got blonde hair and pointy ears, and that's where it ends. And she's also far too harsh in the way that she responds to people. The amount of times I've seen her lip curl in this episode, it's utterly ridiculous, utterly beyond what Galadriel should be, even at her worst points. She's not that harsh, and yet she's being portrayed as being this harsh, sour, unlikable character, and it's just completely off with who Galadriel is. Then we have the whole thing where Elrond goes and takes Celebrimbor to meet the dwarves. Now, ignoring the fact that Celebrimbor was known as the friend of the dwarves, that's one of the things we know about his character. Ignoring the fact that it's likely that he was the one that, after establishing Eregion, he then creates connections with the dwarves who would have been not just stuck up in their mountain, but they would have been doing trade with local communities that they had connections with. Ignoring all of that, Durin's annoyed because of a 20-year gap. Dwarves live over 200 years. 20 years, that's... I mean, for a human nowadays, that's the equivalent of 8 years. Okay, that's a fairly big gap, but to call it a lifetime, when he's moaning, saying, "Oh, you missed me getting married and having kids. I've lived a lifetime in the time." It would have made far more sense to have something like a 50-year gap. A 50-year gap, you could say, well, okay, he's got married, had kids, and his kids have grown up and got married. And maybe they've had kids as well. And at that point, you could understand him being annoyed like this. But a 20-year gap for a dwarf is not that much of a thing to be caught up with, particularly when you consider how obsessed dwarves are with their digging and their crafting and so on. They could very easily get lost in time as well with all that they get up to. So that whole thing is just, it's a ridiculous statement to make. It's completely unwarranted for the situation. If it had been a human, fair enough. 20 years is an entire kind of generational gap for a human. Then we have our representation issue. We have the black female dwarf. Dwarves are not black. They might be slightly darker of skin than pasty white, but they spend the vast majority of their time, if not their entire lives, underground. You would not have black dwarves. On top of that, this is a female dwarf, and if you paid attention to the Hobbit, in the kind of introductory elements, we see female dwarves, and these female dwarves have beards, and Disa does not have a beard. We know from Lord of the Rings, when Gimli is talking to Eowyn, he's talking about the fact that some people think that there are no such thing as female dwarves because they look as alike to male dwarves, and we see Aragorn saying it's the beard. He's causing us to have a little bit of a giggle at Gimli's expense. It gives Eowyn a chuckle as well, but it's true. Female dwarves have beards. Disa does not. Disa is not a female dwarf. Immersion completely broken on that. I can't take her seriously as a female dwarf if she doesn't have a beard, because that's the world that Tolkien created. If you want dwarves without female dwarves without beards, go to, I don't know, World of Warcraft, for example. Go to any other fantasy setting where they don't have them and do that. If you want to do it properly, if you want to do Tolkien, you do female dwarves with beards. Also notice with Disa that whilst she is possibly one of the most likeable characters that's in there, which is ironic given how unlikable her the actress playing her has come across in a number of her interviews, she still puts her man down. She still argues with her husband, tells him off, puts him right, has to fix him, and it's the same through all of this. With Galadriel's going to be the one that puts Gil-galad and Elrond's right when it comes to Sauron. She's going to say, "Told you so," because Sauron will be proven to be there. Disa keeps on going against what her husband says, and if it was an every so often thing, it would be acceptable. But the fact that we keep on seeing it in TV series, streaming series, films, and so on at the moment, it's beyond what would make it kind of a fun little bit here and there. It's not good at all. The man needs correcting. It's the default position they go for. It's not good. It's almost, looking at the whole thing, it's almost like they've decided that they wanted, when they created the Rings of Power, they decided that they wanted to have a story, and they created that story, and they created how the characters were going to interact, and then thought, well, hang on, can we fit this story into Middle-earth? Can we use this story and can we, rather than fit it into Middle-earth, can we fit Middle-earth into it? So they've sought to change Middle-earth rather than changing their story to fit what Middle-earth is like. And it just doesn't play well. It doesn't play well at all. And then finally, just one observation. That orc looks rubbish. These orcs do not look like the orcs that we've seen in The Lord of the Rings. I wouldn't expect them so much to look like the orcs from The Hobbit, because these orcs are the orcs in The Hobbit are deemed to be a different species. But I look at the orc that eventually Bronwyn kills. Of course, it has to be her that kills the orc by chopping his head off. That orc does not look convincing as an orc, and I think it sums up the Rings of Power, certainly so far. They've tried to make it look a particular way, and it's just not convincing. This is not Tolkien, this is not Middle-earth, this is Amazon creating their own fantasy series. And despite the fact that they have some story plot elements that they could have used to make a decent fantasy story of their own, it's not a good one. It really isn't a good one. It's... I think I said it in my last video. It's fan fiction. And it's not good fan fiction at all. This is poor fan fiction that does nothing for the actors, even if the actors are doing a good job. Does nothing for them, does nothing for the world they're trying to create. It's just bad storytelling, bad acting in a number of cases, bad character creation, bad plot development. The only thing that we could say isn't bad is the appearance of Middle-earth. But even then, compare it to what we see in Lord of the Rings, it's not a patch on it. So that's episode 2. Obviously, got to wait now until Friday before I can see episode 3. I'm not holding out much hope. This can only get worse from the looks of it, because not only have we got them trying to create their own way that Middle-earth should look, we've got them pacing it so badly that they're just looking to introduce different bits, more and more and more, and each bit is going to be the same rubbish that we've already had. So we're just going to have more and more rubbish dumped on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, and ultimately, yeah, I don't see how if this wasn't something that had already had the money thrown at it, which it has, if it hadn't already had that money thrown at it, I don't see how this series this would last more than one, maybe a second series, purely because of the name recognition value. It really is that bad. So anyway, feel free to comment if you want, particularly if I've made any goofs in the lore that needs correcting. Do let me know on that, and obviously I'll be back again either Friday or Saturday with a review of episode 3.